let us understand the last topic in HTTP, which is HTTP interceptors. So till now we have been using our components and code files in layers, like you call this as HTML file, and that HTML file communicates with a TypeScript file, like data that you have in a text box or what user types in HTML text box, we pass it to the TypeScript file or the TypeScript class. And this can be done in either you do the click event and map to a function, and that function is written in the TypeScript, or you do the ng model, the value is assigned to a property of TypeScript. After that we have a service, and the service receives values from TypeScript. You inject this service into TypeScript, and using that, with the help of di, we call a method, and either you pass a value or you subscribe to the values that were being received in service, and you do the subscription in TypeScript and you receive the values. And we have a web service somewhere over here, web service outside of your Angular application. In between a service and a web service, we have another layer called as HTTP interceptor. HTTP interceptor. HTTP interceptor is also a service. I mean, the decorator that we use over here is @injectable. And the advantage of having HTTP interfaces, like in the last session we saw something about having all these params, headers and such details. So when you have a HTTP interceptor, you place all such things like a header. Let us use a HTTP header, and when you use one single HTTP header in here, every request that is being passed to this web service will pass through this interceptor and will carry that header. If we do not use a HTTP interceptor, for every request that you are performing, like let us say we have multiple components, 10 components, and every component has its own service, and that service is interacting with this web service. Now if you want to have a header like authentication or some other header, then every service should have that header, authentication header in every service needs to be written. Now instead of repeating that in every service, we'll have one single interceptor that will be the common point for every service making a request to the web service. So every service request will pass through this HTTP interceptor and then reaches this web service, and the response will also first reach the interceptor and then to the corresponding service. So it's like we have multiple components, TypeScripts and services, and everyone will be passing from this interceptor. So that is the role of HTTP interceptors. They play a source or a point which can be said as the last point of our request and the first point of our response. And of course HTTP interceptors can be multiple, that we'll see in detail. In this session we'll see creation of HTTP interceptor, and we'll see how we can utilize that. But before that, let's see what the official website of Angular says about HTTP interceptors. HTTP interceptor is an interface intercepts HTTP request or HTTP response and handles them. So it deals with both the request and the response. If you see, it is an interface, and if you implement it, then you are supposed to override this method intercept, which takes two arguments, request of type HTTP request, and the next argument is next HTTP handler, and thus returns an observable HTTP event. If you see the description, it says most intercepts transform. Transform is to change. So this interceptor change the outgoing request before passing it to the next interceptor in the chain. If at all we have multiple interceptors, then one interceptor passes the request to another, and if there is only one interceptor that we have, then this single interceptor will pass the request to the web service. And how do it passes? How does this passage happens? By calling next.handle transformed request. If you want to change the request, we'll see what all changes we can perform in a request. And if, let us say you have changed some request with a header, and then that changed URL or the request will be passed on using this handle method. An interceptor may transform the response. It can change the response as well after passing a request to a web service, and the web service responds with information, and that is first received by this interceptor, and it can change the response as well by using some additional RxJS operators on the stream, and that is next.handle again. More rarely, an interceptor may handle the entire request entirely and compose. Okay, then we'll see creating such a HTTP interceptor and implementing this interface, and we'll see all this stuff in practical now. So what I need to do is I need to create a file, and I'll name it as, let's say, post-interceptor dot, this is service dot ts. So I'm creating a service, and you see the service created by Angular CLI injectable. So similar to this we need to write. So first thing, I'll say export class, and I'll give post interceptor service and implements HTTP interceptor, and this is imported from Angular common HTTP. Okay, now when I do this, I'm supposed to override a method. Okay, so the interface, when you're using an interface, you are supposed to override a method, and that method is none other than intercept. So I'll say intercept, and I need to pass the arguments, which is request of type HTTP request, request of type HTTP request, and let us say any as of now, and the other argument we need to pass is next of type HTTP handler. I say next of type HTTP handler, again the generic would be any, and once this is done, let us make this return an observable. So observable HTTP event, okay. Okay, so this bracket should be something like this, and then you say it's not generic. Okay, HTTP handler is not generic, so I don't need this actually. Now I open and close the bracket, and whose declare type is either void or, okay, I need to return something. For now I need to use the return keyword, and so this is the basic thing of having a HTTP interceptor. As I'm saying, this requests or this receives every request that is happening for this application. Let us see this website once again and make sure that we are doing everything. We say most interceptors transform the outgoing request before passing it to the next interceptor in the chain by calling next.handle. So this we didn't do. Next.handle is a method that help you pass this request to the next layer. The next layer could be another HTTP interceptor or a web service. So that's what it says. Interceptors change the outgoing request before pass it to the next interceptor in the chain by calling next.handle, and it takes the request as its argument. If you have a change, then you pass the changed request. Initially we'll pass the request. An interceptor may transform the response. So we need to return next.handle is the method that helps you make your request move to the next layer. So I need to pass request as its argument. So this is the very basic thing of having a HTTP interceptor, and we can have a console log here for our understanding purpose, and I say in post interceptor, and I want to see the request happening, and I'll save this, but I'm not done yet because I need to register this interceptor in the root module. So open up the root module. So in providers array we need to register the details of our HTTP interceptor, and for that we'll be using an object but not a class name directly, the way we do it for other services. And in this object we'll have three key and value pairs. So the first key we provide is provide, and the value it takes is HTTP interceptors, and you see it's all capitals, and you are supposed to get that from Angular Common HTTP. So this is the first key value, and next we use class, and this is none other than the class name that we have in here, post interceptor service. I'll copy this and I'll paste it because we need the class name over here, and I need to import it from this service. And the last key value pair is multi, which takes either true or false, and if you're using true, then you say that it is to allow more than one interceptor in our application. So you can use multiple interceptors and make this value true, and it will allow you use more than one interceptor in your application. Okay, so if I save it, then you'll see all the three key value pairs that are needed for an HTTP interceptor to be registered in the root module. Now once this is done, if I run this application localhost 4200 and do the console log, let's see what the console log says. In post interceptor, you see HTTP request, the body is null. Basically we are not passing a post request, and so the body is null, and the headers and the parameters, the method is get, and the params we have used page and some details we have given, and your URL, all these you can get from the request. Like if I say, for now what I'll do is I'll say method. So in HTTP interface I can say request dot method. So in console log you need to say that request dot method. So it prints only the method that we are passing. It is get. Likewise, you can select any other thing that you need and you can modify that as well. We'll try to modify or provide something extra for the request that is being passed from our application to the web service. Now for that, what I need to do is I'll say in post HTTP interceptor 1, and this is like, or I say interceptor before modification, and I'll have another console log where I say after modification, and in between I'll perform a change to the request. So let me have a variable like const m request or something like modified or changed request. That's what the website says. You can intercept, transform the outgoing request before passing it to the next interceptor in the chain. So I'm transforming the request. So I'll say transformed request equal to, how do I do the transformation? I use the request. This argument is what I use, request, which is holding the request details, and I say dot clone. Clone is a method that can help us change the request that is happening, in which I need to pass any of the request details like the URL, so this, or other details like the body that we are passing. And if you see, I already have certain headers and params. Headers will have a header being added from our HTTP interceptor, sorry. So I say request, and headers are written in object as an object, and we say headers request dot headers. And if you want to set something new, then you use the set method, in which we pass certain headers like authorization, and you give the value like Kiran. Now if I save it, this you don't see the change as of now. Before and after they remain the same. You don't see any change at all, because you are not passing the transformed request, you are passing the request only. So I need to pass the transformed request. Now if I save, and here again I need to use the transformed request. Now if you see, we are using authorization headers. Okay, so in network, if you see users and you see this is response and request authorization is Kiran. Okay, so this is one thing we can perform on a request. Likewise, let us say a service is setting a header, and if you want to add few more, then you use the append method. So we did some changes to the request and we are passing to the web service using that changed request. Now web service does respond with something, so it gives a response. Now to handle or to see the response that is coming in, again HTTP interceptor is the first place where you receive the HTTP response. Now to see that, before we return all this, we need to use a method called as pipe. Pipe is a method that helps you write some of the RxJS operators one after the other. Like I can say tap is another operator of RxJS, and then I can say map, and then I can say filter. So these are some of the operators of RxJS, and pipe is a method that receives all such operators and executes one after the other and passes the response of tap or the outcome of tap operator as the input to this operator, and again the output of map is what filter receives as its input. But these are all we may see in the RxJS session, but here all we use is a pipe method that receives a tap method, and tap you need to import from RxJS operators. I don't see that in the IntelliSense, and I'll use the import. I'll simply say tap from RxJS operators. Okay, so if I save this, I don't see anything, but let's see. In tap, and the tap operator is mostly used for debugging purpose. Like you can see what is the response coming in. So here I say the response, and I can simply do the console log of that response. So I say console log, and I say tap response, the response. Now if I save this and I come over here, and you see tap response. So this is the response that you are receiving. The body, the output of the data that is being passed by the web service, and headers, what all headers it is passing, and some information like the status is 200. The type we saw HTTP event is what it is mentioning, and the URL, and of course. So these are the things that we bother. Mostly we use the body, and if you want to see a very particular thing, then you can say response dot what all we were receiving: body, headers, URL, type, status. Now if your status is okay, then you can proceed further, or you can display some message. I will see URL. let's see if URL works. So URL didn't work, and when you see, it gives only type. Maybe okay, response type is 0,